Hello folks, today I'm going to read a few pages from this wee book that my wife got me just at Christmas. Why do we say that? 101 idioms, phrases, sayings and facts. A brief history on where they come from, by Scott Matthews. Scott Matthews, about the author. Scott Matthews is a geologist, world traveller and author of Amazing World Facts series. He was born in Brooklyn, New York, by immigrant parents from Ukraine, but grew up in North Carolina. Scott studied at Duke University, where he graduated with a degree in geology and history. His studies allowed him to travel the globe, where he saw and learned amazing trivial knowledge with his many encounters. With the vast amount of interesting information he accumulated, he created his best-selling books, Random, Interesting and Fun Facts You Need to Know. He hopes this book will provide you with hours of fun, knowledge, entertainment and laughter. Bonus. Thanks for supporting me and purchasing this book. 6 benefits of reading idioms. Knowledge, stress reduction, mental stimulation, better writing skills, vocabulary expansion, and better communication skills. There you go. Why Do We Say That is a concise and comprehensive collection of idioms created for you to have an easy-to-use, go-to guide on how to apply and understand the most beautiful aspects of the English language: idioms, popular sayings, phrases, and proverbs. My goal was to collect idioms, their meanings, uses, and origins, so you would have them all in one place and at your hand, instead of having to search the internet. Some of these phrases have many uses and can be traced back to numerous origins, countries, and cultures. Since I aim to keep the form short, some of these fascinating stories had to be condensed or even overlooked. I hope you have fun and grow to love the English language and its rich history even more. P.S. Apologies to my British friends. I'm using American English rules here, so if you see grammatical rules that don't make sense, that's why. I'm just going to go ahead and just start flicking through the writing. Which ones as we go? That's number 1. So to turn a blind eye. The phrase "to turn a blind eye," which means to ignore something, comes from a British admiral who actually had one eye. Back in 1801, during the Battle of Copenhagen, Admiral Horatio Nelson received flag signals from his fleet commander, Admiral Sir Hyde Parker, ordering him to stop an attack on enemy ships. Using his one blind eye, Admiral Nelson pretended to look through his telescope and then declared to his men that he didn't see the flag signals. Nelson continued with the attack, succeeded, and was promoted to fleet commander after Parker was fired. Caught red-handed. The idiom "caught red-handed," which means to be caught while in the process of doing something, originated in Scotland in the 15th century. It was coined in reference to an Old English law that was established to punish people who butchered stolen farm animals. According to the law, for a suspect to be convicted, he had to be found with the butchered animal's blood still on his hands. To eat humble pie. Back in the 14th century, after hunting parties returned home, the lords and other important men were offered the finest cuts of meat, while men of lower social stature were offered the entrails of the animals. These entrails were known as numbles, a term that was shortened to umbles by the 15th century. Often the umbles, pronounced as humble, were baked into pies and served to the low-class men who considered it a humiliation. That's how the idiom "to eat humble pie" came about. Today it means to accept that you are wrong and to apologise. To let the cat out of the bag. Back in the early 16th century, in medieval markets, traders would sell piglets tied up inside sacks to make it much easier for farmers to transport them back to their farms. Farmers usually wouldn't bother opening the sack to confirm their purchase because they didn't want to have to chase a loose piglet around the crowded market. So, some shady dealers came up with an idea to swindle unsuspecting farmers. They would find less valuable animals such as cats, tie them in bags, and try to con farmers into buying them. If the farmer chose to open the bag, the jig was up. That's the origin of the expression "to let the cat out of the bag," which we use today to mean to reveal a secret, either intentionally or unintentionally. To bite the bullet. Before the development of anaesthetics, surgeries were painful affairs, especially when performed on the battlefield. When soldiers were wounded, they had to be stitched up or even get limbs amputated as quickly as possible in crude and very painful processes. Sometimes the pain would be so overwhelming that the soldier in question would grind his teeth and bite his tongue. To prevent this, the soldier would be given a pad of leather or a wooden stick to bite on as the procedure was being performed. However, there were instances when things moved so fast and the battlefield was so chaotic that no one had time to find a pad or a stick. In those cases, someone would pop a bullet out of a rifle and give it to the soldier to bite on. That's how the expression "to bite the bullet" came about. It means to accept a hardship that's inevitable or to endure impending pain with courage and resilience. To break the ice. For centuries, navigation has been a great challenge, particularly in icy waters. That's why the expression "to break the ice" has been used in the English language as far back as the 16th century. At that time, sailors would use hand tools to dig through the ice to create a path for small boats. People adapted breaking the ice to figuratively meaning to forge a path for others to follow. 2 centuries later, as navigation became more advanced, special ships known as icebreakers were introduced. These ships went ahead of others and used their strong hulls and powerful engines to crush ice and create waterways for other vessels. That's how breaking the ice came to mean smoothing out a socially awkward situation in order to establish a free, relaxed, or open relationship or dynamic. Did you know when you sprinkle a pineapple with salt, it becomes sweeter? It's because table salt is mainly sodium chloride, and the sodium is effective in lowering bitterness levels in foods. Scientists have found that salt diminishes our tongue's perception of the sour taste that's caused by the acidity of some foods, and this allows the sweetness of the food to feature more prominently in our taste palates. Portobello, cremini, and button mushrooms are actually the same type of mushroom, just at different stages of maturity. After the Agaricus bisporus species sprouts, they first grow into a button mushroom. If they aren't harvested at the button stage, they will turn brown and grow into cremini mushrooms. If they still aren't harvested at this stage, they will keep growing into large and fully mature portobello mushrooms. This one species of mushroom accounts for 90% of all mushrooms produced in the US. Rats have been known to multiply very quickly. In fact, scientists estimate that in a span of just a year and a half, two rats can have more than 1 million descendants. That's crazy. In a year and a half, two rats can have more than 1 million descendants. A grain of salt. A long time ago, in 77 AD, a scholar named Pliny the Elder translated an ancient recipe that was used as an antidote to poison. At the end of the recipe, he wrote that it should be taken plus a grain of salt. The concoction consisted mostly of nasty herbs, and the grain of salt was meant to make it easier to swallow. This text came to be understood by future scholars, at least in a metaphorical sense, to mean that serious injurious effects can be avoided or at least moderated by taking a grain of salt. Also, as people learned more about the effects of poison on the body over the centuries, it became increasingly clear that Pliny's antidote didn't have the healing powers it claimed to have, so it was wise to take his advice with a bit of skepticism. So his famous line, "a grain of salt," became synonymous with a degree of skepticism. Today, the expression to take something with a grain of salt or a pinch of salt means to consider or accept information that's being offered to you, while at the same time maintaining some level of skepticism as to how true that information might be. To cost an arm and a leg. Many centuries ago, before photography was invented, people would hire painters to draw their portraits. Portrait painting is an involving and expensive art form, so the larger and more detailed the portrait was, the more it cost. It became common for people of limited means to prefer to have just their head and shoulders painted as opposed to the whole body. Only royals and other rich patrons could afford portraits that included arms and legs. That was the birth of the phrase, to cost an arm and a leg, which means to cost an exorbitant amount of money. Later in the 19th and 20th centuries, soldiers would lose their limbs in war, and an arm and a leg took on a more literal meaning because many considered the loss of body parts too high a price to pay. Cat got your tongue? When someone goes inexplicably silent when you expect them to speak, it is common to nudge them with the light-hearted question, "Cat got your tongue?" That question wasn't always asked with a light touch. It's the shortened version of the question, "Has the cat got your tongue?" which originates from the old British military. Back in the day, those who were found guilty of wrongdoing were flogged. There was a specially made whip called a cat o' nine tails, which captains would use to whip the errant individuals. The whip had 9 braided lashes that were designed to inflict multiple wounds. It was sometimes called the cat because it would produce wounds that looked like cat scratches. The people who had the misfortune of being flogged were so stunned that they were unable to speak for a while, so other people would mock them by asking if the cat had got their tongue. Off the record. When someone says something off the record, it means that they are sharing information in confidence and that there is an agreement that whatever they are saying should either not be repeated to other people, or if it is repeated, it should not be attributed to the original speaker. This phrase was inadvertently coined by President Franklin Roosevelt in 1932. At the time, interviews were conducted and recorded in very formal settings, and by saying that he wanted to speak off the record, Roosevelt meant that he wanted to talk to journalists and audiences in a more laid-back setting where he could crack a few jokes rather than just focus on serious topics. The term quickly gained popularity amongst journalists, who started to classify their interviews as on the record, where people officially acknowledged their statements, and off the record, where the identity of informers remained confidential. To paint the town red. The Marquis of Waterford, a man named Henry de la Poer Beresford, was well known for his wild partying and mischief. The public referred to him as the Mad Marquis, or the Mad Marquis, because he was known for getting kicked out of Oxford University, getting into crazy fights that sometimes ended in duels, stealing and damaging property. In one of his most legendary rampages, the Marquis visited the town of Milton Mowbray with a bunch of his friends. He got really drunk and somehow ended up painting several buildings in the town red. His spree became a matter of public obsession at the time, and that's how the phrase "to paint the town red" came to mean to go out and enjoy oneself in a flamboyant or over-the-top manner. Riding shotgun. Once upon a time, in the Wild West, long before the automobile was invented, people used to traverse the wild terrain in stagecoaches. This was a dangerous journey, not just because of the unknown geography and wild animals, but also because of highway bandits and hostile natives. To protect the stagecoach, the person sitting next to the driver had to be armed with a shotgun. After automobiles were invented, riding in the front passenger seat became known as riding shotgun. This phrase stuck in part because of numerous Western movies of the early 20th century, which commonly depicted those wild stagecoach rides. Myself and my wife are watching a series, or a couple of different series at the moment. You've possibly heard of Yellowstone with Kevin Costner, which is based in a modern time. There's two prequel series to it. There's one 1883, which talks about the people crossing the Oregon Trail and finding land in the first place, and all the issues mentioned here. And then there's also another separate series, 1923, and each of these, 1883, 1923 and Yellowstone, all follow the same family, the Dutton family, and it's quite interesting. I'm enjoying it. It said Yellowstone has got Kevin Costner, 1883 has got Tim McGraw and Faith Hill, country music people. 1923 has Harrison Ford and Helen Mirren. I recommend it, it's worth a watch. I nearly said Woody Harrelson instead of Harrison Ford though. To give the cold shoulder. To give someone a cold shoulder means to treat them with aloofness or even disdain. We use it to refer to an unfriendly or passively hostile response that one could give to someone else, perhaps because of indifference or a clear intent to hurt the other person's feelings. Back in the day, giving a cold shoulder had a similar meaning, but it was more literal. According to folk stories, it was common for visitors to show up unannounced. If the hosts were pleasantly surprised to see the visitors, they would take their time to prepare a nice hot meal for them. However, if they were displeased or considered the visit an intrusion, they couldn't kick the guest out because hospitality was customary, so the hosts expressed their displeasure by serving the guests a cold shoulder of mutton. I've got to read this one being Scottish. This is a famous Scottish television programme, Chewing the Fat. Chew the fat. The expression to chew the fat means to make friendly small talk with people in the form of a long, informal conversation amongst friends or even a gossip session. Chewing the fat came to be synonymous with idle chit-chat because centuries ago in Britain, people would actually snack on fatty pork rind while idly chatting away. Farmers would preserve their pork by smoking and salting it, and when their friends paid them informal visits to talk about mundane things, they would offer them pieces of fatty pork rind. This practice was also common in the Royal Navy. After spending some time at sea, and when the food reserves were running low, sailors were served with fatty, salty pork rind, which they took with them out of the dining area and chewed on as they chatted when they had free time. The practice of chewing on fat died off with time, but the expression stuck around. To pull someone's leg. During the Middle Ages in Britain, thieves would use all forms of trickery to target their victims. Some thieves worked in small teams. They would blend into the crowd, and one would find a way of confusing the target, while the others took off with his or her belongings. In one iteration of this con, a thief would pretend to be a beggar or a trader, or he would hide in a corner. He would then grab onto the leg of the intended victim and pull on it until the victim fell on the ground. His friends would then swoop in, rob the victim, and they would all vanish into the crowd before the victim had any time to raise any alarm. Retellings of such robberies would elicit laughs from people because of their comical nature. That's how the expression pulling one's leg came to mean deceiving someone in a funny or playful way. I'm going to just pause the video for a wee second. Sorry, I had to stop that video for a wee minute, and my cat was in the litter tray and was scraping and banging about, so it was a bit loud. To steal one's thunder. Back in the early 18th century, a man named John Dennis tried his hand on producing plays, but they weren't very successful as they didn't resonate with the audiences. For one play called Appius and Virginia, Dennis devised a technically advanced method of producing the sound of thunder on stage. His thunder was certainly dramatic and brilliant, but that wasn't enough to make people like his play, so he had to shut it down. A while later, when Dennis went to the theatre to see a production of Macbeth, he was astonished to realise that they were using his method to produce the sound of thunder. While expressing his dismay, Dennis is quoted as having said, "Damn them, they will not let my play run, but they will steal my thunder." That's how the expression "to steal one's thunder" came about. It means to use someone's ideas or creations for one's own advantage, or to prevent someone from getting well-deserved success or recognition for their work. A bigwig. Back in the 17th century, it was fashionable for people to shave their heads and wear wigs in place of their hair. Originally, this was done because men wanted to sport bald hairstyles that weren't attainable with their natural hair. Bold hairstyles, that weren't attainable with their natural hair. Among the more enlightened people at the time, it was a statement of triumph of human ingenuity over nature. Because the hair used to make the wigs was expensive and scarce, wigs quickly became a status symbol. Men of limited means were seen wearing wigs made of just a few strands of hair. On the other hand, wealthy and influential men were able to purchase massive wigs that were made up of thousands of hair strands. People could immediately tell how rich you were based on the size of your wig. People started referring to rich men as bigwigs. This fashion trend faded away after the top hat became popular, but wigs are still used ceremonially in the judiciary and legislature in Britain and other Commonwealth states. To date, the term bigwigs is still used in reference to important, influential or high status people. A red herring. A red herring refers to something such as a clue that is deliberately meant to be distracting or misleading. It is mostly used in detective stories to talk about false leads that investigators waste time pursuing. The expression comes from the name given to smoked herring fish, which is called red herring, because the smoking process has the effect of turning it red. In the 17th century, red herring was mostly consumed by members of the lower classes. Hunters often used their hounds to hunt for small animals such as hares. The problem was that these hounds... Excuse me, I had to pause again because another cat broke into the room that I'm in and started scratching next to me. So, back to where we were. The problem was that these hounds would sometimes catch animals that belonged to poor farmers out in the country instead of wild ones. To protect their animals from hunters and their hounds, the farmers would hide red herring deep in the woods. The hounds would pursue the strong scent of the red herring over long distances instead of looking for prey, and the hunters would be disappointed to find red herring at the end of their trek.